Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to focus on installing Docker and showing an example using Docker and Docker Compose for how we can stand up a local database. Last time we covered setting up Ubuntu using VirtualBox on Windows so you could have a nice development environment to be able to continue on with this tutorial series. All right, let's go ahead and jump right in. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go to Docker's website, and we are going to look at the installations using the apt repository. A quick side note, Docker is a container framework that allows you to basically run a virtual machine within your computer. It's a little bit different from VirtualBox as it's more tailored for cloud container orchestration and things like that, meaning it can work within Kubernetes to run a database or a web application or some other type of service like Rabbit or Redis or Nginx, which is a web server. It's really powerful and it's used all over the web. So it's extremely important as we continue to learn DevOps and how we're going to deploy things into the cloud in future videos. So let's go ahead and get started. I'll put this link down in the description for you guys to have, but let's go ahead and read over what we have to do here. So we need to install using the apt repository. This is available to you on your Ubuntu setup. Let's go ahead and read the instructions for how we're going to do that. So the first thing we need to do is we need to link the Docker's apt repository to our own so it knows where it can pull these different services from. So the first thing we need to do, let's move this side by side and let's open up a terminal. We're going to type these commands: sudo apt get update. This might take a little while for you if you've never run this before, but this basically updates all your packages that are available in apt to be able to retrieve the latest ones. Then we need to download a few services, CA certificates, and curl. Now we need to install our key rings. All of this is pretty quick for me since I've already done this, but for you it might take a little bit of time, so just be patient. And lastly, once we've added the apt repository for Docker, we need to do another update so we can go get those. All right, the next thing we're going to do is install all of the dependencies or the services that Docker needs to be running. They give them to you right here, so it's a pretty straightforward installation process. It's going to ask you if you want to continue. Go ahead and type Y and hit enter. And then just wait a second for this to all show up. Awesome. Okay, so the next thing we need to do is verify that this install worked. So go ahead and copy this command, and we should see a hello from Docker. This will indicate that Docker is up and running, and you can run some other commands to see. If you're getting an issue saying that if you're trying to run Docker as an example, and it's complaining that it can't connect to the daemon, you need to add your user to the Docker group. So right here in the instructions, there's this section: the Docker user group exists but contains no users, which is why you're required to use sudo to run Docker commands. Continue to the Linux post install to allow non-privileged users to run Docker commands and for other optional configuration steps. All right, so let's go ahead and click on this. So we need to run this command, sudo group add docker, and then we need to add our user to the Docker group. So in my case, the user is Santiago. And then you can log back out and log back in, or you can run this command, new group docker, and this will allow you to connect. Okay, well, let's continue on. So the first thing I'm going to show you guys is how you can run a local database using Docker. So let's go ahead and keep our command line open. I'm going to make this full screen so it's a little easier to see. And I'm going to hit Control L. This is the equivalent of typing the clear command. So as we continue moving forward, I'll give you some tips about how to navigate the terminal, as well as shortcuts, keyboard shortcuts, things like that. All right, so the first thing we want to do is we need to type docker run, and then we're going to specify a container. So in this case, I'm going to use timescale DB. This is a time series database that's built on top of PostgreSQL. It's super powerful and gives you everything you need to get up and running quickly with the database. So the other thing we're going to do is we're going to type -p, which is port forwarding. So inside of the container, it's exposing ports 5432 to connect to the database. We need to port forward that to our local machine so we can access that. And then the next thing we're going to type is -t. This is going to run this in the background in daemon mode. And let's go ahead and continue. Yes. So there's one more thing that this is complaining about. So it's given us an error. It says the database is uninitialized and a super user password is empty. So we need to add one more flag to our Docker run command, which is this -e Postgres password. And this just specifies the password for the super user. So let's go ahead and do that. I believe I might have these out of order, so let's go ahead and I believe following. Let's see, so -e, -d. I believe these actually all need to come at the front. So let's go ahead and copy these. And we're going to paste them. Oops. Okay. So the actual commands should look as following. I accidentally hit enter, but it should be docker run -p to port forward, -d to run in daemon mode, -e to specify an environment variable that gets injected into this container, and then the name of the container itself. And then we can type docker ps, and we should see it running, though we're not. So let's see what we did wrong here. All right, so once you run this command properly, and you type docker ps, you should see that you have a database running within Docker. And it gives it a funny name. You can specify this as well, which we'll get into in the near future. All right, so let's keep moving forward. So we did docker ps. We can see we have the container running. Let's go ahead and bring this down. I'm actually going to move right into Docker Compose because I find it to be more useful for specifying what containers you want running. Docker Compose can run one or more services, and it can connect them through a virtual network on your machine. So this can be really useful if, for example, you're trying to run a local blob storage that mimics how S3 behaves, where you can store files on the cloud, as well as you need a database, and potentially you need something like Rabbit to send messages across your system, or Redis to have a fast in-memory database. Docker Compose is really, really powerful and allows us to do all of this. So let's go ahead and bring this container down. So we're going to type docker stop, and then we're going to begin typing the name, which in this case might be different for you. So just check the names column here in your docker ps command. And you can just start typing, and you can hit tab. And this works for a lot of Linux machines where it will auto-complete what you're trying to enter. So in this case, it should return the name. So let's just check. Great. Okay, so we can see here that there's no containers running. Let's go ahead and open a Visual Studio Code. So what I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to create a new folder. So in my home directory, I'm going to go to Documents. I'm going to type mkdir docker compose example. And in Visual Studio Code, I'm going to open that folder up. Awesome. Okay, so now we have an empty folder that we're working in. I'm going to create an empty directory called data. You'll see what this is used for in just a second. And then I'm going to create a new file. I'm going to call this, I'm I'm going to create a new file at the root of the project. So I'm going to call this services.yaml. So YAML is a markdown language that allows you to specify how all of your containers are going to be set up. So let's go ahead and start filling this out. So the first thing we're going to enter is version. This is the version of the YAML file for Docker Compose to read. And then we need to start specifying our services. So we're going to actually specify timescale DB again, which is the container we just ran. We're going to give it a container name. So now when we start this, it should have a specified name that we want it to be using. So I'm just going to give it the name timescale DB. We're going to specify the image, which in this case is timescale/timescale DB colon 2.18.2-PG17. So this is going to be running timescale version 2.18.2, and it's built on top of the Postgres 17 database. Next thing we need to do is specify the ports. You saw this already in the single command to run this database, where you use the -p flag. In Docker Compose, it's the ports keyword. All right, so we're gonna specify 5432, and that's gonna port forward to our local machine at 5432. Next thing we're gonna do is specify a volume. So if you don't do this in the single command or in here, none of your work will be persisted. So if I go and enter a bunch of data into the database and turn off Docker Compose and shut down the container without this volume section specified, nothing will be persisted the next time I restart the container. So this is super important, and we'll explain this in just a second. So what we're doing here is we're saying that on my local computer in this data folder that's inside of this project, we're going to create a second folder called timescale, and all of the data that lives in the containers varlib PostgreSQL should be saved into there, and this will persist our data. Now, if you went and deleted this directory, all of that data would no longer exist, and you would have to reset up your database every time. All right. Next, we're going to specify the environment variable. So in this case, this is the Postgres password. And then lastly, we need to set up a network for our system for our services to run on. So default, the name is going to be net1. Let's go ahead and save this file. The next thing we're going to do is we are going to run Docker Compose. So in order to do that, we need to open the terminal up, and we need to type the following commands: Docker Compose -p, and that's the project name. So we'll call this Docker Compose example -f, and we're going to specify the file, which in this case is services.yaml, up, and -d, which will run it in the background is in daemon mode. Okay, so it's complaining to me that there's already a container that uses this name. This is because I've already been playing with this. So let's just give it a new name. So I'm going to call it timescale DB1. And then it also complains I have another network that's already specified. So I'm just going to increment this to net2. And we're going to go ahead and hit up on the keypad, 1, 2, 3, to get back to its original command. And we're going to run Docker Compose -p, Docker Compose example -f, services.yaml, up -d. And you can see here that it's running 2 of 2. It's created our new network, and it's started this new container, timescale DB1. So let's go ahead and just check that it's running with the docker ps command. We can see that it is, which is good. So now let's go ahead and create our actual database table within the database. So I'm going to hit Control L to clear this, and let's go ahead and run a few commands. So we're going to run docker exec. This allows you to run a command inside of the container. So we're going to specify the user that we're going to use, and then dash IT, and the name of the container, which in this case is timescale db1, and then the command we want to run. In this case, we're gonna type PSQL -c, and then we're gonna say create user dev user with password. We're just gonna make the password, which isn't very secure, and you shouldn't do this in a production environment, but for local development, it's okay. And go ahead and hit enter. And you should see this create role if everything is correct. If not, closely read your the entry you just made and revise it to match exactly what I have here. All right, I'm going to hit up on the keypad again to get the same commands. And this time we're going to create a database. So we're going to create a database. We're going to call this database dev. You should see the create database response from the Docker container. Now we need to assign some permissions to the user that we just created. So we're going to grant all privileges on database dev to dev user. Syntax error near dev. So let's see what we did wrong here. So we created the database dev, and we're saying grant all privileges on database. I spelled database wrong. All right, perfect. So now we see grant. Let's go ahead and give the user a few more permissions. So we're going to say grant usage on schema public to dev user. Great. All right, we need to now modify the PSQL command to specify a database. We need to give permissions to this user on the specific database. So we're going to type -d, we're going to say dev to target that database, and then let's run another command. So we're going to say grant usage on schema public to dev user. We can see that it gave us the grant, and then we need to run one more command within this specific database that we created. We're going to say grant create on schema public to dev underscore user. Awesome. So now we granted all the permissions to our user to be able to modify our database. Let's go ahead and explore that database a little bit. So I'm using this program called Azure Data Studio. This is just a database explorer that allows you to query and modify your database. So let's go ahead and first try and connect to our database. So I'm going to just close all of these. Okay. And then let's go ahead and start exploring this database. So we need to connect to it. So I'm going to click New Connection. In the connection type, I'm going to specify PostgreSQL. I'm going to specify the server name as localhost. The dev username is dev user. The password is password. Let's just check remember password here. And you can see that it's actually identifying the databases we have within this PostgreSQL instance. So we're going to connect to dev, and we'll just call this dev DB. This is optional, but just makes it look cleaner. Okay, so now you can see we're connected to our database. You can do all this through the command line as well, and actually, if you have Postgres client running on your machine, you could do this using the terminal, but I think sometimes it's easier to visualize these things, at least for me, while I was learning it was. So we'll continue to use a lot of IDEs and things like that. So if you look at this dev database, there's this public schema, and then there's no tables. So we need to go ahead and create a new table. So I'm going to right click on the database dev, and I'm going to say new query. All right, and now I'm going to create a table. So you can see here I have create table cars. We're going to create a column with varchars, which is like a string, and it's a maximum character length of 255. We're going to create model and then the year. So we're going to run this, and we can see that the create table was successful. So let's go ahead and insert some data into this table. So I'm going to take this command here. I'm going to say insert into cars, and in the columns brand, model, and year, I'm going to specify Ford, Mustang, and then the year is 1964. So I'm going to hit enter, and it inserted one row. So let's just test this out. Awesome. So we can see that we have our data here. Everything we inserted is good. So let's actually show you how to shut down Docker Compose. So in order to shut down Docker Compose, you need to type the following: Docker Compose -p and then -f services.yaml and stop. And then if we type Docker PS, we can see here that it's been stopped and we don't have any containers running. Let's go ahead and bring that up one more time. So one thing you'll notice before we do that is we have this folder data, and then it has timescale and data. So it's actually saving all of the containers information from this directory into this local directory here. So in theory, when we start the container again using this command, docker compose -p, docker compose example -f services up -d, we should in theory have all of our data still existing. So let's go back here and let's refresh this connection. And I'm going to run this again, and boom, we can see it. Ford Mustang 1964. Awesome. So at this point, we've completed this portion of the tutorial. Docker is a super powerful system for running containerized applications locally and in the cloud. You've learned how to install it and how to use Docker Compose to run your different services locally, as well as a little bit of PostgreSQL commands. We'll touch on these in a further video, but for now, this is the next step. So after this video, we're going to be talking about running Kubernetes locally and deploying containers into Kubernetes using K3ds. And we will show you how all of this begins to tie together. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe and click the bell for notifications. Until next time.